Hi everyone, how are you? I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to tackle chapter 11 on the public speaking project that is labeled Speaking with Confidence. Now, the idea with speaking with confidence is that we have to first tackle the fear or comprehension, communication apprehension. And it's important to understand what the fear is before we can develop what the confidence is and how you develop the confidence for public speaking. Because for a lot of us, speaking in public is a very, very true fear. And so it's really important to sort of go over it, understand it, especially as we're coming up to your speeches here in class. So let's begin. First of all, let's clarify what communication apprehension is. And basically what that is, it's the fear of public speaking. It's the fear of being in an environment where you're sharing information to a public and the act of doing that. That kind of communication can be dreaded for a lot of people. And the chapter here describes three kinds of fears. One is trait anxiety. And when you're talking about trait anxiety, you're talking about the idea that that it's within you to be naturally afraid or fearful of that situation. Similar to the way that some people are just naturally shy, some people are just naturally an extrovert. It's just a trait that's you. Now, the thing is that shouldn't stop you from being a really good public speaker. There are a lot of public speakers who have said themselves that I have a fear of public speaking. And you'd be surprised that I am a public speaker, but you figure out ways to overcome that fear and become a confident speaker. But for some people, having that trait is very similar to someone that's just naturally a shy person. The next situation is where it's a state of anxiety. And when you're talking about a state of anxiety, you're talking about a situation where you are feeling afraid in a specific situation, in a specific context, the time, the place, the people, who you're talking to, what you're talking about. So a lot of times it's not that you're a fearful person and that you have a fear of public speaking, but sometimes it's where you are. It's who you're talking to. It's what's the situation, what's the context of what you're trying to do. And sometimes that can create anxiety for you or a fear of public speaking. And then the last one that we have here is scrutiny fear. And when you're talking about scrutiny fear, it's the idea that you feel like you don't want to be judged. Like you don't want to go up there and say something where someone can judge you in a negative way. And they can wonder about whether or not you know what you're talking about. And that fear of being lesser than, or of having people look at us like we're lesser than, that's a true fear. Nobody wants to be looked upon in a negative fashion. So it really is a fear that comes out of being scrutinized, which is where the term comes from. So the next thing that we have here is called the frames of reference. Now there's talking about two frames of reference here. And when you're talking about a frames of reference, it's that you understand the context of the situation. You understand sort of what public speaking is, what it looks like, where it is, what happened. So you have a personal frame of reference, and you have what's called a personal frame of reference and a habitual frame of reference. When you're talking about the habitual frame of reference, it usually is something that you see or have heard or have experienced, not necessarily as the speaker, but you've seen it happen. You know what a public speaker does, what they look like, how they dress, depending on what the situation is, because you've seen it. You kind of experienced it from the audience perspective. When you're talking about the personal frame of reference, that's when you start talking about your own personal experiences as a public speaker. How did that go for you, positively or negatively? And that could impact whether or not you have a fear of public speaking for that particular situation, right? The next thing we have here is cognitive restructuring. And that's when you take the situation and you almost create the fear. You create the context of that situation. And sometimes you scare yourself. Some of the sources of the apprehension could be previous experiences. It could be lack of information. It could be just a fear of what you're going to say and who you're going to say it to. There's a number of sources that creates fear within us that limits our ability to give a speech. And being able to understand what those sources are is key to overcoming them. Now, the impact of that apprehension is that it could stop you from actually giving the speech. And that could be pretty terrible when you really consider that in some situations, people look upon you. You could think of things like weddings, ceremonies like eulogies, funerals, where certain people, whether it be the parents, think of a best man speech at a wedding. You're the best man. You have to give a speech. Are you going to allow that speech, your fears to stop you from giving you a speech in what could be one of the most important days for your best friend? Well, no. And so that's why it's important that we understand what that impact could be, negative impact, and how it could stop you from actually giving a good speech. And so really what you have to do is you have to learn confidence. Sometimes some people have it. You know how we talked about traits and how people are sometimes shy. There are some people who are just naturally confident people when it comes to public speaking. And you know what? That's really great for them. And they're going to have an easier time to publicly speak. But that doesn't mean that just because you're a confident speaker, that you're a good speaker. There are plenty of people who have great confidence in speaking, but that doesn't mean that they're well prepared, they're well organized, or that they know what they're talking about. It just means that they know how to talk in front of a lot of people. So it's important to have all things, not just confidence, but the skill and knowledge in giving a public speaker. So in learning how to build your confidence, there's a couple of things that you can do. One, you can practice. And it says here, well, actually we said practice. Let's start over. Prepare well. Now, when we're talking about preparing well, think of it like if you were baking a cake, right? If you were baking a cake, you don't just start putting things together, right? You look at the recipe, you find out what ingredients you need. Do you have the right measurements? Do you have the right tools? Do you have the bowl? Do you have the mixer? You have all these things. You get ready to bake. You get ready to fix a car. You get ready to clean the house or do whatever it is that you're going to do. First thing you got to do is prepare. You want to get all the information you need in order to give a good speech. So that might mean doing research. That might mean creating your outlines, which you'll do for this class, or your note cards, or whatever it is that you're going to use. In this class, you're going to use an outline. But, in other occasions, you may use note cards or whatever. But the idea is you want to prepare to get ready so that when you are ready to give a speech, you know you've done everything you can in order to be ready for it. The next thing you have is visualize success. In a lot of sports, they tell you want to see yourself doing well. If it's baseball, you want to see yourself with the bat hitting the ball. You want to see the basket, the shot going into the basket. A number of things. You want to see yourself succeeding. It's about closing your eyes and visualizing yourself up there on the stage or in front of the classroom, and really just kind of seeing that you're being successful in your speech. And that idea of visually closing your eyes and visually seeing it can sometimes manifest itself in real life. The next thing here is avoid gimmicks. A lot of times people will say, oh, just do this, or just picture the people wearing this, or just stare at a point in the wall in the back. That doesn't work. A lot of times that may help you get through the speech, but it won't necessarily help you give a better speech, nor will it help you give a more confident speech. Gimmicks are gimmicks for a reason. They're just things that sort of are a band-aid to what the problem is, but you don't fix the problem. And so the idea here is to avoid them. Yes, you can listen to someone doing this or doing that, but people who are really good public speakers have put in the time and the effort to do it right, to practice it, to prepare well. The next thing here is minimize what you memorize. Now that seems kind of interesting, right? Because a lot of people have said, well, you want to memorize your speech, or you want to know your speech. Well, there's a difference there. Memorizing your speech means you know the speech in your head word for word. And if you're going to go up there and you're going to give a speech word for word, it's going to sound robotic. Your cadence and your pace and your volume might seem a little monotone. And it's not going to feel like you have a chance to connect or adapt to the audience. So a lot of times you want to know what you're going to say, but you don't want to memorize what you're going to say. You want to know what's part A is you're going to talk about this, part B you're going to talk about that, part C you're going to talk about that. And in some cases, your speech may change a little bit from the words you use from one to the next. But what if somebody raises their hand? What if somebody asks a question? What if something happened that deterred you or you came up with a new example that you didn't use last time. Are you going to memorize your speech all over again? No. And also remember that when you memorize something, you're relying on your brain to remember everything. And that's really hard. And a lot of times we forget or we jumble our words. The next thing we have here is practice out loud. And what that means is that when you're practicing, don't just sit back, don't just lay back, have the outline and just read it word for word to yourself. Just read it and read it and read it and read it. Because that may help you know the speech, but it doesn't help you know to deliver the speech. You have to voice the speech. You have to understand, maybe when I say this word at this part, I have to raise it to give it more power, or, pause for a second to allow my audience to think for a second. So practicing your speech out loud will help you deliver it with the enunciation, the pronunciation, and the articulation to make sure that it gets across the way you need it to get across. Okay? And then the next thing you have here, and the last piece here, is customize your practice. For a lot of us, we're different, both on the speech and as an individual. And sometimes we may need to practice our hand gestures, or some of us may need to practice our volume and our tone to make sure that we speak loud enough, because we tend to speak softly. So customize your practice to fit your needs and the needs of the speech so that you can get that part done. Some people may not need to practice the volume. You may. So you want to make sure that you customize the practice that's going to make you the best speaker possible. All right. So that's the chapter for this week. I hope you enjoyed reading it. Actually, it's one of the better chapters, which is why I put it, even though it's number 11, I put it more in the front of the class, because I think it's important for us to understand it and hopefully use it for your next and upcoming speech. All right. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm here for you. And good seeing you. All right. See you next class. Bye-bye.